Hey guys, welcome to Electronic Dance Money, your number one business resource for making money as electronic musicians and producers. What is up, everyone? Welcome back to a brand new episode of Electronic Dance Money. I am your host, Christian Casito, and we got a great episode in the works for today. I'm here with Brock Shinen from Shinen Law, but also from Indie Music Success. We met through the Alex Wayman and I do an event every month, and I've talked about it on the podcast before. Where we do like a networking meetup event. We have people come in and just hang out, network with each other, all different music industry professionals. But then Alex also does some, he does like events, professional events where you can come in, hang out, and there's a professional talking about a specific topic. There's been a bunch of people in the past who have talked about running ads and metadata, and you were on the last one in February that I was in. And Mike, who also, my buddy Mike Vaughn, he kind of helps co-host some episodes every once in a while. He was in there as well. But it was a fantastic hour-long event that you just dove into everything there is to know about publishing rights organizations, why you should register your music, and some of the law behind it. So after going through that, I was like, this is perfect for my audience. I need to bring you in here because I know producers have so many questions. So thank you for taking the time during that event because it was fantastic.
Yeah, man, that was a fun one, and I'm looking forward to this one because I know there's a lot we could cover, so much that we can help. So yeah, let's go for it.
Yeah, definitely. You actually mentioned, because I sent an idea list of like things we might talk about, and you're like, you want to talk about like mashups and remixes? I was like, I don't even know why I didn't think of that, but that is like a big, that's probably at the top of the list for producers on questions like, how am I allowed to release this? How can I release it? What do I need to get approved? So we'll dive into some of that stuff. But in the meantime, if you don't mind, let's hear your story, your history of how you got involved in music, because you're not just on the law side. You are also a musician yourself. You write and record your own music. So how did you get into that state of the industry and move yourself into law?
Yeah, man, it's a fun sort of long story, so I'll just share some highlights. I grew up in a very musical family. My mom and also my dad was a pastor, and so I grew up in the church, right? So my mom was the worship leader. So she's playing piano, she's singing everywhere, right? And my grandparents had this traveling quartet. And so I'd grow up, sometimes during the summers, they'd be on tour. They were signed to different labels. As a kid, it'd be like, oh, they're going to this event or they're going to be performing. So I was around music from a pretty young age. And my older brother picked up guitar early on. And then I was like, I got to learn something. And, it's like, you're a kid, you learn whatever, like I played trombone in elementary, the typical stuff, and then picked up a guitar. And I think musically, granted, this is kind of dating me and also the era and the place where I grew up, but I think a lot of it was influenced by my older brother, because I'd hear him listening to like a lot of like UK punk stuff or like, Black Flag and the Sex Pistols and stuff like that. But then I would also hear Rush. And I remember just being like, oh my gosh, this drummer, it's insane, like Neil Peart and Alex Lifeson on guitar and Geddy Lee. And so even as like a fourth grader, I'm just like amazed at this musical talent, right? Plus I'm around music. So it just really kicked in this fire for, I want my life to be around music. And so like you can fast forward through my entire life, whether it's like playing small groups, guitar at church, or it's writing songs, writing pop songs for my daughter who's now a singer. So there's all these different things. I love to write. I love to create. If I wasn't, I think I'd just fall over, and die or pass out, God forbid. But yeah, so that's what drives me. Creating is what drives me. Even being a lawyer, if I'm not creating in the context of how I practice law, it just, you start to wither. So for me, I get the creative mind because I couldn't exist without being creative, and I've written books and screenplays and songs and poems, and I'll sit at my computer and just try and figure out how to make beats. I'll try, whatever. So that's kind of all the precursor to where I'm at now.
I resonate with that so much. When I was younger, I remember going to Warp Tour with my sister, my sister introduced me to all these like alternative rock bands and more of the like hardcore metal bands that were all on Warp Tour from like 2007 to 2011 or so. So this was like, this is 12 years ago or so. And I mean, at the time how old was, I think I had to have been like probably 12 or 13. And so my sister was a couple years older than me. She started listening to those bands, which I started listening to them. And then she started going to Warped Tour. So I started going, and I remember having the same thing where, AP Tour would come through. I'm from Boise, Idaho. So it would come through there at the Knitting Factory, and the spring tours would come through and whatnot. And I remember we would go to every show. I mean, it was, I remember talking to kids when I was like, or I should say adults, but people when I was like 18 that were my same age. And they're like, oh yeah, I just went to my first concert last week. And that would that blew my mind, because at 13, I had already been to probably 50 concerts and just constantly going. And I remember listening to that music and going to those shows and experiencing the events and just thinking, this is what I wanted. I didn't know what it was that I wanted to do. I was unsure, but like the experience of listening to music live and seeing these musicians and listening to their recordings, I just knew I wanted to do something. I had no idea what it was. I had no idea what a DAW was. I mean, I was not sure. And then I found electronic music and realized, oh wait, you get a DAW and you like open up and you can just play around with synths. And I was like, okay, this I think might be what I like. And it took over my life when I was like 15 or 16. So I'm 27 now. And and that's bled into other creative things too. Like, I've been getting into software development for the last 8 months or so, almost a year. And like that in and of itself, like creating applications and building things, there's such a big creative force behind that. And it's a different outlet that I just love, like that techie stuff of building things that computers use to talk to each other and people can experience. The same thing with just, the creation stuff has taken over my life, and I love building and creating things. So I respect that so much. How did you get into the law side of things?
So I was actually a music publisher. There's a lot of pieces of the story. I was actually on my way to being a clinical psychologist.
Oh, wow.
And I'd done my undergrad. I was in a grad program. I was about midway through that program with a master's and doctorate, and just really felt like I knew I wanted to help people, but I just wanted, I don't know how to put it in words, but just wanted something different to be able to help them. So I started, just looking at different options. So I found a job at a music publishing company that was really blowing up, and ended up in their accounting department, but pretty quickly got recruited into the publishing department, and then got put in charge of all the publishing, which was just crazy, right? And this is also like physical products were still the thing. And so, I mean, with charting and with just even like the profit margin on physical product, it's insane, right? And so I had a full view of like, oh my gosh, this is all the rights management and licenses that have to go back and forth for sometimes just one song. There's 20 to 30 different contracts, documents, whatever. So I wanted to supplement my work with a law degree. And so I started going to school at night, thinking, oh, this will be my job forever, and I'll just like bring a law degree into it. And, once I started law school, it's just different dynamics come into play. And so what started as, I want to supplement this music publishing job, turned into, oh, now I see a lot more opportunity of what I can accomplish with this degree and passing the bar. And so that was by that point. And I'd been writing a lot and doing a lot of things creatively. So I'm like, this gives me a lot more power to help people, but also help myself. And so that was the trigger for Law specifically, you know.
Knowing you from the event and watching some of your content, like on your YouTube videos, I get the feeling that you do want to help other musicians. Like that's the honest bread and butter of what you're trying to do with the whole law side of things. And I don't see, lawyers are very, in the music industry, lawyers are very behind the scenes. They're like unheard of. They're kind of hard to find. They're hard to spot. And if you do find one, they usually work for like a big company or something, in which case they're not necessarily out to help out other musicians, but help out the company they're working for. And so it's really fresh to see a new face that cares about musicians, the rights they have, and how we can push that movement forward, because musicians, I feel like, have been cut out of so many important things in terms of like deals and the way deals are wrapped up. And so it's nice to see someone else. Like I'm very much, have you read The Go-Giver before?
The Go-Giver?
Yeah, by Bob Berg. Great book. I'll have to send you a link to it. I talk about it religiously on this podcast, but it's about, adopting the business philosophy of wanting to help others without necessarily an expectation of anything in return. And it creates this great karma-like effect. It's been, adopting that philosophy has been great for my own businesses and just my personal life. And so I get that sense of just the ability to just help people is what will take you on a much more rich journey, and people will respect that and want to work with you way more. So I appreciate that so much. And let's jump into the topic of today, which is all about publishing rights organizations and what that side of the industry is like. You know, I've had an episode that I did solo by myself, and I talked about some of the points you talked about in that event, but I feel like you do it more justice knowing working in that industry than myself. So let's talk about why artists need to care about publishing rights organizations and what it has to do with their music in general.
Yeah, totally. I think the good place to start with that question, or the answer to that question, is understanding that creativity is either a hobby or a business. And that's a harsh reality for a lot of people, because sometimes it has to feel like a hobby because we have a 9-to-5 that, puts food on the table, pays the rent and all that kind of stuff. But I think if you step back and say, look, I don't want it to be a hobby. Like this drives me. It gives me juice, right, for life, and it could pay the bills. It can if you treat it like a business. It generally can't if you treat it like a hobby. So I think the starting point is this mental perspective of, I don't, like, if I'm going to create, like for me, what pays the bill is my law practice, right? For the most part. And some of my creations do. But if I wanted to do that full time, I'm going to have to shift my mindset to, all right, this is a business. Now, if it's a business, would you start any business, like a food truck, a shoe store, retail, whatever, like an online business, without thinking about, where am I going to put my money? Like, I need a bank account. Do I need an LLC or a S corp? Like, you're going to figure stuff out, right? But as creatives, many times, all we focus on is the creative aspect at the neglect of the business aspect.
Yep.
So to me, it's like a layup answer of like, how are you going to be in a business that you don't fully understand, or at least you're not trying to fully understand?
Right.
And music and creativity in particular is all hinging on, based in copyrights. So if you don't have a fundamental grasp of what copyrights are and why they're important, you're not going to understand not just about protecting your creativity, but also monetizing it effectively. And go back 20, 30 years, like there was only so many ways you could really effectively monetize creativity, because of gatekeepers, because of the cost of creation, because if you didn't have a label support or whatever, like, what are you going to do? Just a quick side note, and I don't remember this story very often, but I remember I was in elementary school and I went to Goodwill and I found like this little kid's turntable, because I wanted to start scratching and like making music, where I'm like, so I'd play a track on like my boom box then, and then I'd have another one that was recording, and I'd have like this little record player connected to a speaker, and I'd be like, doing that.
Yeah.
But it got me thinking about, like, I remember, it's so strange, but a friend like realized I was doing this, and he's like, wait, aren't you going to get in trouble? I'm like, trouble? Well, you know, as a kid, you don't know what that means. But as an adult, you're like, trouble is infringement, right?
Yeah.
But so you have to think about infringement and protection and monetization. So let's get pragmatic.
Mm-hmm.
Copyright is a limited monopoly where you, the creator, own a certain bundle, what we call a bundle of rights, right? There's the right, and these are exclusive to you, the right to publicly perform your stuff, the right to publicly distribute for the first time your stuff, the right to make copies of your stuff, the right to make derivative works, which might be like a translation or some sort of adaptation or remix or whatever. The right to transmit sound recordings by digital transmission. And I know I'm missing one, copy, derivative work. It'll come to me. Public performance, did I say that? Anyways, so understanding that you have this bundle of rights, then you start to understand that that piece of property, each of those rights can be exploited. But it could be exploited in a way where you profit from it, or it could be exploited in a way where you get taken advantage of. Mm-hmm. So think about all the people that might, you know, hear your song, take your song, or use your beat or whatever, put it up on YouTube, and they're getting the likes, they're getting the streams. You know, you're thinking, well, how do I monetize that? Or how do I get my money extracted from the fact that people are using my songs on social media or whatever? It doesn't just come with checking the boxes on, well, I issued a license or I've negotiated a deal with the social media platforms. It really goes back to, do I understand how copyrights even work in order to know, do I need to be registered with a performing rights organization? Why does that even matter? Like, how does that fit into the ecosystem? The Copyright Office, do I need to register this? So I know like we can go 1,000 directions on this, right? So yeah. I'll stick with the PRO piece because we kind of kicked off with that. The PROs, the Performing Rights Organization, is the organization that collects on public performances of your music. So just do like the tracing of this. I write a song, I go, you know, on stage, I'm at a rave, I'm at a party, I'm at a concert, and I play it, you know, live speakers, whatever. That's a public performance. Who's collecting on that? Well, the gig like paid me, you know, a few $100 to show up. That has nothing to do with the performance. That's the venue paying you. But those songs could be extracting value. Let's say the venue has an ASCAP license and you're an ASCAP writer. That venue is paying ASCAP a fee, right, every year, where they can play any song in the ASCAP repertoire, and it gets pooled into, and it's a complicated accounting scheme, right? But I might make a few pennies from that. Well, if I'm doing that all over the country, all over the world, I'm doing that multiple times, big venues pay more, blah, blah, blah. That could actually turn into systematic revenue. Mm-hmm. But it starts with understanding the economic ecosystem of where the money travels and why, to even understand, why do I even care about a PRO? What's the big deal? You know, I know my song's not on the radio, so why do I care? Well, did you know that streaming platforms are paying through the PROs? For the performance side of that stream? Oh, I didn't know that. Maybe I should have. You know what I mean? Yeah. So these are the pieces that all go back to education. For me, is critical to you making money. Mm-hmm. And if you don't understand how the money works and where it travels and why $1 goes here but $1 goes there, you can never understand how to fully extract it. So do you need a PRO? There's no question. You have to be affiliated with a PRO. Which one? Let's run through real quick. There's in the US, there's ASCAP, CSAC, BMI. There's actually a couple others, but those are the big three. Two of those are government authorized monopolies. Most people don't really pay attention to that, but the government has said you're a monopoly, but you have to operate by these rules. That's ASCAP and BMI. CSAC's private, much smaller, whatever. Which one do I go with? Well, ASCAP and BMI are massive. Like the costs are pretty close, $50, $100. Free for writers. You know, do you register as a publisher also? So you can do the math and you can weigh the options. Sometimes people, like everyone I know is a BMI PRO, you know, publisher. So then BMI is fine. Some people, everyone you know is ASCAP. Do I have a recommendation? It's more about when they're big like that, their web of collection and accounting is pretty much everywhere. And so then it becomes less about which one you affiliate with and more about, are you keeping your stuff up to date? Are you updating new songs, right? But there's no question, if you don't register with a PRO, you're putting music out. There's money being generated. You're just not being paid for it. So I'll hit pause there because I know I can go on this, but
no, it was perfect. You answered some questions I had lined up, so it was I loved it. I loved it. Especially, I'm seeing a lot of my friends where they have tracks being played out by big artists, like artists that are selling out venues with 2,000 people, and they're playing their music live. And so it is like, if you're not registering that music, registering it correctly, you could potentially be losing out on money, especially, in electronic music, there's a website called 1001 Track List. And have you heard of that site before? Yeah. So you can go on and see who's playing your music, where and when, and like in what environment. And if your music isn't registered and you see your tracks being played out, you're technically not getting paid for those playouts. What is the difference between oh wow, I just had it lined up, a public performance, there we go, a public performance versus a private performance? Because you mentioned something after you wrap that answer up. I've got a quick little story for you and a little anecdote to share with people. But what are the differences between a public performance and a private performance, and why should artists care about that as well?
yeah, totally. So generally speaking, public performance is in front of the public or open to the public. There have been a lot of cases around this, and the way law works is sometimes you have to pull cases from other industries or whatever to put into. So let me give you a quick example, and I'll try and make it quick. If you remember, there was like Blockbuster, those movie rental places, right? And you can go in, rent a physical copy, a VHS tape or a DVD or whatever. There were some other businesses where it was almost like a karaoke room where you could rent your movie and then go in a room and like order food, and they had couches and whatever. So there was a lawsuit by some of the studios over that's a public performance for which those studios weren't being paid for, right? And the business, countered with, it wasn't public performance because these are private rooms rented by private individuals. The court said it's public because it's open to the public. We don't care if there's 4 people in there, 400 people in there. It's the fact that it's open to the public. So not the number of people. So when you think about public or private, if you and I gather a few of our friends and invite each other to one of our houses and no one else is invited, that looks like a private performance, right? From the sense of public's not invited. But at what point, at what number does it become a public event, even though it's in my house, right? Is that 40 people? Is that 400 people? The law hasn't come up with, look, the law is a generic concept, hasn't come up with a number that triggers whether it's public or private. So the way you have to look at it is, first and foremost, I think, ask the question, is it open to the public? If it is, we don't care how many people are in there. If it's not open to the public, like how many people are in here? And if it's 4 and they're all family or like close friends, probably not public. If it's like a house party, and I don't care, it's your house, my house, but if it's a house party and there's a lot of people, that could be a public performance, right? So you're always messing with dynamics and specifics in each circumstance,
And I think it's important to understand too, this is talking about like private businesses. Private business, it's open to the public, right? You go to a Starbucks, they better be paying some sort of publishing rights organizations. If they're not, the artists, any music that goes on in that Starbucks, they're not paying for any of that music. And so this goes back to a point you had mentioned. I remember in the event, you're like, if you guys are out at a public setting and they're playing music, like some sort of public free event thing that you're at, find out if they are paying for a license. And funny enough, I was at South by Southwest, was just going on about a month ago or so, a little less than that. And there was a Saturday after, it was the last weekend, that Saturday, there was a little event going, not even an event. It was just like a bunch of DJs that were in town, some big DJs too. We're like, hey, we're all getting together at Zilker in Austin. Come hang out. And there was probably like 20 or 25 people there, and decks were up and people were spinning, and that was going on for like 3 or 4 hours. It was a ton of fun. Super cool. People were just jumping on and off. And I remember talking to the guy that owned everything. I was like, hey, do you have a license with PRO, like ASCAP or BMI? And they're like, oh no. I was like, well, this is like a public performance. And the only reason I'm saying that is like everyone there was basically a DJ and an artist. And they're all playing their own music and they're playing other people's music, and it's like, this is awesome, but you guys do realize, like, none of us, we all want to get paid for our music. We all talk about it, but none of us here are paying a licensing fee so that we can pay artists. So, going just that step forward and like at least putting it on people's minds of, hey, if you want artists to get paid, you should go get a license to do this sort of a thing. And especially they're like, yeah, we're thinking about like doing this more monthly sort of a thing. And I've seen other public events like that, quote unquote public events, but it's at Zilker. It's a public park. People bring in decks and start playing, and that's awesome. It's a ton of fun, but at the same time, like, go pay for a license, because you want these artists to get paid for. You want to get paid as an artist, so does everyone else. So if we're all like working towards that goal and making sure our our I's are dotted and our T's are crossed, then we're all getting paid.
Right. And to add to that, I mean, it's a great point, but to add to that, you also have an opportunity for a couple things. Number one, you're educating a venue.
Yep.
And think about how many hundreds of thousands or millions of venues in the United States alone, much less the rest of the world, that are playing music and don't even think about that. So you're educating them. And a lot of these people genuinely want to help the artist community. They just don't even think about it. Mm-hmm. Secondly, you're also creating monetization opportunities for yourself. So if like wherever you're at, whatever part of the country or world you're in, that you can build relationship with a venue and they don't have a PRO license, I'm not saying don't still encourage them, but it's also an opportunity for you to say, hey, look, I have nothing to do with what you're doing with other artists, but I just like, for me, it's important. So I'll issue you a license for when I do these songs. And they have you out, they pay you a couple $100 for the gig, but you can say, hey, I usually charge a minimum of $100, per performance for, the license of the rights to the songs, like the fact that they're even being played here. And granted, that might get you kicked out of some venues. My point is more to start thinking like a business person and not less as an artist, just add on, supplement with thinking as a business person, because I'll say this doesn't just apply to what I just said. This applies to generally you being an artist and a creator, is don't always think of shutting people down. Think of providing a way for them to pay you.
Yeah.
Because the gut instinct is, I got to call a lawyer, send a cease and desist anytime we see anything going wrong. And this is a much broader answer, right? Or a much bigger problem. Stop thinking like that. Don't pay somebody like me to write a letter that doesn't really put money in your pocket. Think, how can I extract value from this relationship? Not how can I stop this?
Yeah.
It's not a bad thing. You mentioned that author in that book. I would have said the same thing about like Seth Godin, or even Gary Vaynerchuk, right? Or Simon Sinek. Same thing, like give away. The giving economy is what grows you. You want your ideas to spread. You want your art to spread. You don't want to be sending cease and desist letters out. You don't want to be shutting people down because it stops like your music from traveling. What you want is your music out there. Dude, play my music or let me play, but let's do this the right way, not shut it down or else,
Yeah, and this is the way to move the ball forward with rights in music and making sure people are getting paid. I see it day in and day out. People bitching and complaining on social media. We're not getting paid. It's like, okay, well, do you know how you're supposed to get paid? Like, do you know how the system works? Because if you don't know how the system works, then you shouldn't be spouting out about how you need to get paid when you're going and playing venues that aren't paying people. So it's like, it's that plain and simple. At least if you're putting it on people's minds, the whole educational thing is so, it goes levels beyond where you could possibly imagine. If you're putting it on someone's mind, they might think about that later and go, oh, you know what? Let me take a look at this. And they realize, oh, you can literally go on BMI or ASCAP right now, and they have a purchase a license button. It's very easy to do. So,
and it's cheap too, by the way. That could be $200 a year, right? And for a bar that's doing a couple million in sales, what's 200, 500, $1,000 a year? Nothing.
Yeah, definitely. And I know there's people who listen to this podcast that they are playing at bars. They're live DJing on Fridays and Saturdays, and I wouldn't put it past most of those bars that they aren't paying some sort of license. And listen, like, whether that's intentional or not, they probably are just more ignorant. They just don't know that this is a thing that you're supposed to do, or that they should do. So let's jump into some more of the nuanced stuff with EDM producers specifically. So with EDM producers, I was mentioning before we started the podcast, with EDM producers have kind of two routes they can go. They can sign a single with a record label, which you see day in and day out. Most of those are smaller record labels that don't have the biggest reach or the biggest budgets. And some of them may also be ignorant to some of this music business stuff, especially in the publishing rights side of things. But then also EDM producers are releasing independently. They're, going on DistroKid or Amuse or some other platform to release their music independently. Let's start independently and then go back to the record label side of things. That way, because we might be able to wrap up some of the, what are the ways in which you need to ask questions to record labels on how they're registering music and how you should. But as an independent artist, how should you be registering your music with a publishing rights organization? Because there's like 3 different ways you can actually register your music, correct?
Well, maybe not 3 different ways. There's just multiple like check boxes or triggers, right? We're saying the same thing. So I think of it, and this isn't necessarily chronological because all this stuff needs to happen and it all needs to happen like right now. But if you come up with a track, then you want to release that. If you're going with DistroKid, for example, if it's all original and you don't need any third-party clearances, there's nothing sampled or whatever, it's just 100% you, makes it a lot easier, right? So let's start with that and then add some talk about sampling and whatever. But for your part, you got to think about copyright registrations. There's a common misconception is that anything you do, including like mailing it to yourself, emailing it to yourself, protects it, because in the United States, at least, and you have listeners all over the world, so some of this will be different depending on where they're at. But in the United States, a copyright protection exists, it subsists in an original work of authorship when it's fixed in a tangible medium of expression. Historically, cassettes, digital tape, whatever, CDs, vinyl. Now, really, we're thinking digital files. So as soon as you fix that in a tangible medium of expression, like a digital file, it's a WAV file, it's an MP3, whatever, it's protected by copyright. The problem is we don't know what that means. What do you mean protected by copyright? I can't go file a lawsuit for infringement because I fixed it in a tangible medium of expression. Because what most people don't realize is, I have to have a federal registration before I could file a lawsuit. And so it means that many people are like, okay, you don't need to register with the Copyright Office because you already have protection. True, but it's protection with that. It's like maybe a horrible example, but a gun with no ammo, right?
Okay, yeah.
You might scare some people, but you can't do anything with it. And so the registration is the key part to actually getting the protection, getting the rights. The other piece is the PROs. ASCAP, CSAC, BMI here, but there's GMR. There's all kinds of different, depending on where you're at in the world, you'll have a performing rights organization. Now, I will say for your international listeners that some countries have mechanical rights collection societies that are together with performing rights organizations. Here in the US, our performing rights organizations are separate and apart from any mechanical collection societies. So where you're at will depend on what rights are covered. But here, you pick one. Let's just say, because a lot of people give this so much like, oh my gosh, what if I picked the wrong one? Then change. Like, it's not a big deal, right? You're locked in for a year, 2 years, depending on which one you sign with, but then switch. And you'll realize, you'll talk to people, they're collecting regardless. So ASCAP, CSAC, BMI, pick one. That's the point. Pick one, come up with your designee, which just as a side note, practically speaking, I'm Brock Shinen, but I might have, as an ASCAP publisher, Brock Shinen Music. In fact, I don't even remember my ASCAP publishing designee. It probably is like Brock Shinen Music or something, whatever. So pick yours. You complete your writer's account. Now your account's set up, but you got to get your songs in there. So you start listing like all your songs. Now, one difference with EDM producers and producers in general is, remember, a lot of times you're balancing which is the sound recording or the track and which is the musical composition.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. Yeah. Which is probably one of the next like follow-up questions, because with a track, you're going to have a difficult time, especially within EDM is what is the musical composition, right? There may or may not be lyrics. It may just be a beat. So do you protect, like, how do you get paid? Like those are big question marks. And it's kind of a tough question to answer, because a musical composition usually fits into a box of definition where most people would say, oh, I know what the musical composition is. It's lyrics and melody. So you have the melody part. What about the lyrics? Well, sometimes we have lyrics, sometimes we don't, but you can protect the melody. So protect the melody, and you protect that by, but what if it's a drum beat? What if it's just weird synth or scream sounds or whatever? That's where it gets tricky for producers, is because we're not even sure what to protect with the PRO.
Right.
Which is also why the starting point is the Copyright Office, because the Copyright Office, the copyright registration, will protect your thing, your creation. Granted, you need to use the right forms and check the right boxes, but assuming you do, whatever it is, you protect it. With the PROs, they can't protect your master or your sound recording or your track, right? They don't do that. So what do you register with them? The melody. Unless there's lyrics, then it's the lyrics and melody. But many times you're uploading a track as evidence of what the musical composition is, right?
Right.
So, but then I know there's 1,000 rabbit trails we can go on every single piece we go, but you need to protect the master, right? So think about Sound Exchange and if you're taking notes, like look up Sound Exchange. It protects the master side in a similar way. Mechanical rights. Like what about mechanical rights? The Harry Fox Agency, there's administrators that will do that. There's music publishers that will do that. But if you're solo, if you're doing, it's all DIY for you, look at the Harry Fox Agency. First time I heard that phrase, I was like, I'm not even clicking on that. I don't want to know what that is.
Yeah, let's
like, there's going to be some pop-up blockers here, I'm sure.
Give me some not safe for work.
Yeah. So all that to say, you need to be looking for where I can, and you're protecting the underlying musical composition, you're protecting the track as much as you can, right? Now, and when I say protecting, setting up your account, getting all your info in there, and then uploading your tracks, making sure lyrics are covered. And then you have all these, like, think about DistroKid. When you submit a track to DistroKid, like, you could check the box for YouTube,
right,
content ID programs,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
That's now you have to pay for it, but it's an additional way for that mechanism to track, hey, my song's being played. It extracts a fee from that, hopefully, and pays you, right? Mm-hmm. But those are all pieces of there's random tools now everywhere. There were never these tools before. 20 years ago, these tools didn't exist. Now you're constantly on a research project every day. What new tool exists for me to protect my IP and extract value from my IP and monetize my IP? So that's kind of the setup for that.
There's now, if I correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like I remember you mentioning there's a way to, like, you should register your music as a publisher or a writer.
Yeah. So, and there's different ways to do it, but keep in mind that the way that performing rights organizations work is that they collect income, but they pay writers and they pay publishers.
Yes.
You can register as a writer and forget to register as a publisher. That publishing money is still generated. You just may not be capturing it. Okay. Now, some of them are moving more towards a model of where if you're a DIY writer, check the box and we'll get your publishing too.
Okay.
But historically, it would have been where it registers a writer and registers a publisher. Because what we often forget as creators is that the money's being made. It's just you're not getting it.
Yeah.
So the money's in the system, right? Oh, you're a writer. Let's put your portion into your bucket, but we don't have a publisher registered. So we'll just keep that in the slush fund. After a certain period of time, that slush fund gets paid out to whoever's top 10. You know what I mean?
Jump into that real quick, because that was very surprising. I had no idea the way a lot of these PROs kind of pool up the money and how they're actually dividing it out. So if you don't mind just kind of jumping into that real quick.
So we would love to believe that it's like a 1-for-1. My song spun one time and there's a 0.0000000, fraction of a penny that goes to that one spin. It's not really how it works. It's sort of a weighted algorithm where you say, okay, my song spun once, but your song spun 10,000 times. That doesn't mean I make a penny and you make 10,000 pennies. Now yours and mine is weighted against Justin Bieber, Drake, Baby Rexa, whatever. And it's like, okay, so now you're also weighing against popularity and the volume of streams and the volume of activity. And so ultimately, there's a formula that says, okay, let me give you an example. I know that I've had my music certain places where I know I'm registered with ASCAP. I know that it played. I know I didn't make a dime from that. And it's frustrating for creators because we're like, shouldn't there be a trace from
Right.
that performance to my bank account? There's not. And there never, and honestly, I don't think there ever will be. And you think about it, Spotify, like all the DSPs get sued all the time for inaccurate accounting. All the labels get sued all the time. All the publishers get sued all the time because this should be an accurate business. It never has been. And honestly, I don't think it ever will be. Not because of dishonesty, just the complexity of, like, think about it, the complexity of, like, is your phone and your computer like next to each other? Is that one stream? It's two devices, so two
Right.
streams,
Right.
but I'm sitting in front of both. So imagine if you could, as a creator, put up 100 devices all
Yeah.
playing your song over and over and over and over, right? Somebody's got to figure that out. How do we keep you from getting excess money when you really, so 10,000 actual separate people stream your song versus you streaming it 10,000 times? Should we
Right.
pay you the same as the you know what I mean? So
Mm-hmm.
that's part of the issue. And really it comes down to trusting trusting a system that's not trustworthy, not because of it's evil, or I mean, maybe there's a piece of it that is, but just because there's no way for 100% accuracy and transparency.
Yeah.
So all that leads to is, well, if the money's made, if I'm not registered, I at least got to show up to the team, to the field with my equipment ready to go, right?
Mm-hmm.
To make a stupid sports analogy, I got to be prepared for that. That's the very first step. The second step is I got to track it down. Well, guess what? Labels employ teams of people just to extract their rightful income from YouTube, for example. So if a label's hiring people just to make sure they get paid, what do you think you're going to do as an individual? It's going to be
Mm-hmm.
very difficult. That's
Definitely.
why the more you know and the more that you can track this stuff down and go after it, the better off you're going to be. Because otherwise, when I mentioned earlier, it goes into a slush fund, generically speaking, you have all this money that's been generated and we don't know who to pay out, right? So we put it in a big bucket. We being a PRO, a label, a publisher, a DSP, every single entity in this music space has to put money, they don't know where it goes, into somewhere, like an escrow account, a holding account. We'll hold this till we figure it out. Guess what? Every state in this country has a statute of limitations. And maybe this is a little bit peeking behind the curtain. At a certain point, you don't even have the legal right to sue them for not
Right.
paying you. That money's still there. So where'd it go?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe into a shareholder's pocket, maybe into a new glass building, or maybe into the artists that are doing billions of streams instead of thousands of streams.
Yep.
And that's why I want to empower the indie community to say, that money's yours. Go get it. Because if you
Mm-hmm.
don't, the ones who are already winning are just going to get your money too.
Yeah, to speak on the keeping track of all the stream stuff, I did an episode on the blockchain and in music and what that could do, and I think like the answer to solving that tracking issue, I think, is within the blockchain, because you have the ability now. It's convoluted and people are just, it's a weird space we're at with the blockchain right now, and I'm hoping things become more simple and easier and implemented over the next 10, 20 years or so. But the answer there is you register your music, it gets registered on the blockchain with a tag ID. And whenever that tag, these streaming platforms also need to be on the blockchain. So when they pull that track, it's pulled from the database of the blockchain where it can pull that unique ID, and everything can get tracked by that simple ID. And the second that track gets played, there's a portion that comes out of some sort of wallet that then gets deposited directly into your wallet. That's a very simple way to put it, but like that is kind of the way that it needs to get tracked. Right now, there's no system in place to be able to track that sort of a thing, and that really is the issue. But this isn't a blockchain episode. We're not going to talk about that sort of thing. But I think there's something there to be said of how you can track where your stuff is being played, how it's being played, what you're getting paid, all that. But let's jump over to the record label route real quick. I know we got about 15 minutes, so there's a couple more questions I want to ask specifically with the mashups and remixes. So we'll jump into that towards the end. But when you are signing a track, a single with a record label, what does it? Now every record label is probably going to be a little bit different depending on how they have their contract set up and if they're even registering their music. But in an ideal world, does it look like the record label is registering for the publisher and the artist is registering as the writer? Or is there a different, is it a mixed bag? What does that look like when you're signing with a record label? How should it look, and how should artists be asking record labels some of those more detailed, nuanced questions?
So at the largest labels, the largest publishing companies, they want to be proactive about it, in part because that is their money too. And that's so them being proactive in registrations it's self-serving in a good way, right? They need that, they want that. So generally speaking, you sign with a big record label or big publisher, they're going to take responsibility for that, but not all the time. So as part of your negotiation process, if you're not registered with a PRO and you're signing a deal because they do love the music you're putting out, you need to say, hey, as part of this deal, I want to make sure that you either help me get registered or you do it for me or you enable me, whatever. But you can't leave that off the table. You have to put that on the table. But that's at sort of the biggest and the most well-funded. Everybody else, you're on your own. I mean, that's a reality. So if you don't say anything, there's a lot of indie labels and a lot of indie publishers that don't even know where the money's at. And the reason why is it's because people that love music and maybe know how to do some digital marketing, that's literally like half of the indie labels out there in any genre.
Yes.
I know how to manage social media well. I kind of got a business mind. I'm a record label. And I'm not mad at them, right? Yep. I love that they're helping our community. But what I don't like is they don't know any more than you know. And so it's like, it's the blind leading the blind in a sense of like, well, then let's do this together. Ask the questions. Who is registering with the Copyright Office, with the PROs, with Sound Exchange, with Harry Fox? Who's administering all the licenses? Who's making sure that when my track goes out, that it's being collected? Is anyone figuring out YouTube Content ID? Is anyone figuring out if there's a deal? Can we do a deal with Facebook, with Meta, covering Facebook, Instagram, with TikTok, whatever? If you're not asking the questions, again, the money's being generated. It's just not going to you. So when you sign these deals, you have to go in assuming they're not going to handle that for you. They're not going to take care of it, most likely because they don't even understand it themselves. Yeah. But they can't show that to you. They can't act like, and I'm not, like I said, and I mean this sincerely, I'm not mad at them because they're trying to help. But if you don't ask the questions, that just gets swept under the carpet and neither of you are making money. So ask the questions. Who's doing this?
If they don't know, send them the link to this episode, right? If you're asking those questions, they have no idea. This is probably the episode they need to listen to so they can get a grasp on things they need to research and the ducks they need to get in order. So that was perfect. Thank you so much for that information. Let's jump into mashups and remixes. Let's just start with mashups. So we take two popular songs, we put them on top of each other and make it into this different original thing that's not very original. What rights let's just first start off with the person that creates that mashup. What are they allowed to put out, and what rights do they have to put that stuff out without getting the okay from the original artists?
So this is where it's a complicated mess, not just because it's legally complicated, it's also pragmatically complicated. And it's also socially complicated now because some things are permissible socially now. They're just acceptable, like almost like we can't stop it. So we might as well embrace it. Because think about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, there were a lot of cease and desist and lawsuits over you use my song on YouTube. Now it's like, I'm not going to sue you. I'm just going to monetize your content. Right. Yeah. And so the piece of it that's hard is what legally could put you at risk socially is just like everyone does it. And so I'm not going to worry about it. However, I'm a lawyer. So I see when you do that, and then it's the one time you do get a cease and desist, but it's not just a cease and desist. pay us 50 grand or we're taking this to court. And guess what? You've infringed their copyright. So let's break this down real quick. I take two songs, I mash them up, right? I don't own either of those. When I say I take two songs, most likely I'm taking two pre-recorded sound recordings. Sampling is the most risky thing you could do, because in all the way up to the Supreme Court, if I copy your musical composition, like take a Taylor Swift song, and I kind of like maybe copy some lines, some of the melody, but you're not sure, but you're kind of like, it's a Taylor Swift, maybe
it's close. It's almost there. It's relative.
right. But the burdens of proof, what's infringement, what's not, there's a lot more gray area. If I take 1 second, give me one of your tracks. If I take 1 second, you could sue me for infringement. That's crazy and good for the creator. It's crazy for like how that works, because it's such a drastic difference. So if you're a producer and you're taking two tracks, you're effectively sampling without consent. I mean, granted, it's much more than a sample. So we've already infringed. Like, let's check the box. We've infringed because we've used their material without their consent. Now we've also merged it with another piece, like two into one, without consent. That's the right to create derivative works, potentially. So now there's two rights I've violated. Up on YouTube, I put up on the DSPs. Well, who's getting paid for that? And the question is, well, didn't I create something? You did, but am I allowed to go into your library and pull your stuff and then create something new from it?
Right.
I'm going to get sued. So mashups are tricky because we all see them every day. We see them without lawsuits. In fact, some of us are like, we know, like, David Guetta put this out, Deadmau5 put this out, and we're like, wait, if they're doing it, like, why can't why can't I? But you don't think about behind the scenes. It's highly improbable that they licensed what they've done. I don't. This quick side note, but case in point, David Guetta put out some sort of like fake track with Eminem. Like, I think it was an AI generated.
Yes. Yeah. I talked about that. And I actually mentioned in an episode, I talked about that. I was like, there's going to be copyright something there. Like, you can't just do that and put it out and be like, it's my own original.
Yeah. And granted, he's like, it's a joke. I didn't, put it out the DSPs or whatever. But the truth is, he probably crapped his pants because, like, he's like, oh man, there's so many additional issues in that. Can you emulate somebody's voice without actually copying it?
Right.
All that kind of stuff. But my point here is that when you mash up, you should get consent, because without it, you're exposed legally. But we know 90% of the time, no one's getting consent. They do it. And many times what's interesting and weird and cool at the same time is you put it out and even the original artists are like, I love this.
Yeah, right.
Repeat. What are you supposed to do?
Yeah.
Think about it. The artist probably doesn't own it because their publisher and or their label owns it. So the artist can love it and you still get sued because the artist doesn't control it. So when it comes to mashups, my conservative lawyer self says, go get consent to mash it up. Do it right. You'll pay a license fee, but then you have zero risk of liability and you could extract the maximum value from doing that.
Now,
go ahead.
What about, because I've heard this before. I've heard the past, oh, well, if you just put it out for free on SoundCloud and don't enable downloads, like, you're fine. You're not making money off of it.
It's 100% false, coming from a 20-year veteran attorney.
Good to know.
What it really translates to is you'll probably not be on the radar and or probably won't get sued, but legally that is there. It's an infringement.
Right.
Whether or not you get sued, that's a statistical probability. That's not a legal issue. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. And are remixes essentially the same way? So if you take a song and maybe you cut the vocal out, or you copy the melody and change it into a completely different sound and kind of make a whole remix off of it, and you publish that on like SoundCloud for free. You're running into the same thing if you take a melody, turn it into a new sound or a vocal, publish it on SoundCloud, it's still a licensing issue, correct?
Same exact issues. It just looks different and it's defined differently. But the really comes down to, without consent, it doesn't matter if it's free or not, because quick side note, I think is worth your people knowing. If you infringe my copyright and I cannot prove actual damages because you gave it away for free, if I've registered mine properly, I can get what are called statutory damages, up to 150,000 per infringement. So you don't make $1 off of my music, I could still get 150 grand plus attorney fees.
Wow.
So 6-figure, 7-figure liability, and you didn't even make any money from it. But the hard part is always balancing. Yeah, but no one does that. I don't know what to tell you, because that is a reality.
Yeah. I mean, there's gray area. It's nuanced. In electronic music, I mean, people play out mashups. I play out mashups live all the time at venues. I've sent them to friends. I've remixed stuff and do it everyone does it in electronic music, and no one really cares. So I think it is important to understand the repercussions. Like, this is a possibility. And I think you're right. It is a numbers game. It's a statistical thing where it's like the odds are pretty low, but understand that they are there. So,
but quick interjection on that point. You mentioned blockchain. Right now, that would require everybody to play.
Yeah.
Everybody on all sides of the transaction. But think about it. Let's say 5 years from now, we're all on blockchain. That risk just went to 100%.
Yeah.
Because you are on the radar, because every transaction is now on the radar.
Yeah.
So that logic has to find its way of like to the reality of how we're living right now.
Yeah, it's weird. And I would imagine you'd have to put some sort of way that you can quickly purchase a license to do a remix, and that people are getting paid out. Like, I'm sure there's a way to go about it, but going to blockchain stuff, you're right. Everyone has to be on board, and it's gonna be a weird, sticky mess for a while. But we're at the end of our time, Brock. I appreciate you coming on so much. If there's anything you'd like to plug, obviously you have a YouTube channel. If someone wants to hire you for some attorney work, because I'm sure there are people listening that would love to pick your brain some more, go ahead and plug away whatever you've got. Any socials, anything like that.
I'm not a big social, like I'm not a big salesman, because what you said at the beginning, I truly do want to help the community. But, I like to pay the bills too. So, yeah, I mean, if I think my YouTube channel, the Indie Music Success, is there to just provide solid education. My socials, Brock Shinen. I mean, I think that's the best way. And for me, this is all about like empowering this community. And I love what the independent community creates. I love what the EDM community creates. So to me, it's like, if I can contribute to that, great. If you need to hire me, I'd love to help you if I can, but that's not why I'm here. And that's also why that's not as big of a deal to me. But yeah, watch the content, see if it helps.
Awesome. Brock, thank you so much. I'll have all the links to everything we talked about, including your socials and whatnot, on the show notes at enviousaudio.com/episode 104. Thank you so much again, Brock. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a really good time.
Of course. Take care.